William Bill Ewen, who was one of the early activists in the Historical Society. I'm going to be asking him about the early days in the founding of the society. This is Mary Allison doing the interviewing on March 21, 1991. What is your recollection about the early days, how the society got started?
Well, there were several of us who were interested in pulling together Hastings records.
Who were they?
Gordon Smith, Jerry Finkelstein, Harry Harvey, and some others.
Can you remember any of the others?
Well, I would have to go back. I can't offhand, but
what is your memories about Harvey? He was the village historian.
Yes. Harry was a very nice man, very quiet, gentle man. And the history of the village was almost a passion with him. He spent hours and hours researching history down in the files of the Yonkers Herald-Statesman in the library.
He was a good historian. We have some of his notes, and I've looked at, and they're very carefully done.
Yes. Anything that Harry wrote, you can depend on.
You could.
Yeah.
That's good to know, because some of these old accounts tend to be hearsay, or at least I tend to question them. But he did some research on the Battle of Edgar's Lane.
Yes.
And some of it he even went to Germany and dug up records of the Hessians who were involved in that. I was impressed with that.
He didn't think much of it as a battle.
No, it was really a skirmish.
He said a skirmish. Actually, what happened was that Colonel Sheldon's forces came down and ambushed the Germans and drove them down to the river. Some of them had to jump in to get away, but I don't know. There's very little, I don't know of any record that tells how many men were involved or just when it took place. But it became quite a big thing as far as Hastings is concerned.
Well, it was our one
battle.
Our one battle. So he was instrumental in organizing the society.
Well, he was one of those, yeah. But at the time, Harry was getting on in years and he wasn't too well. So he was not involved for very long. When we started out, we were, of course, up in the municipal building, and eventually they gave us that storage room on the south side, second floor, for the records.
The closet.
The closet, yes. And we used to have meetings in the room on the second floor on the south side, the big room where
where the gallery is now?
The gallery is, yeah. The gallery kind of moved in and took it away from us, but they had more to offer in the way of exhibition material than we did. But we had several shows there. I remember one where I made lots of big prints in my own darkroom at home for the show.
Was that the personalities?
No.
Was it good?
No, it wasn't. It was a show on old pictures of the village.
No.
And probably those prints are somewhere in the archives, the ones that I made for that.
I guess, when would that have been? Can you remember?
I don't remember the date, but I probably have it at home. I can try to look it up.
Were those great big ones that were mounted on styrofoam?
Yeah, I think so.
I know we have some of them.
They were, well, they were fair, 11 by 14 or thereabouts.
One is this photo mural here that I was telling you about with that man with the stomach.
No, I didn't make any that big.
You didn't make
No,
that, but
I
you
don't know where that-
see that fellow over there again?
Yeah,
Can't
yeah.
miss it.
I don't know where that came from, but,
Well, where did you obtain where did the photographs come from?
well, they were collected by those who were interested. I made copies of many of them, copy negatives and printed them a large size.
Did you solicit them through the newspaper,
No,
or you just went to,
I don't remember in detail how we acquired them, but we did. Then there were other shows, and we used to have an occasional lecture, presentation up there in that room. I gave one many years ago on Hudson River steamboats, as I did a few years back over on the hall on Main Street.
can you remember some of the other early meetings?
Well, yes, I can remember them, not in great detail. I have a file of this material at home, but I put it away somewhere and I haven't been able to dig it out. I will try to do that. I'm going over all my files now. I put on a show in the municipal building in the gallery down the lower floor.
You mean in the entrance room, sort of the lobby?
No, the one down in actually the basement.
Oh, I've never
You
been
know.
in the basement.
Well, it's they don't call it the basement, but I just can't think of the name of it. It was presented to the village and paid for by one of our residents whose name I can't recall either. But I loaned all of my Hudson River steamboat lithographs, big frame pictures, and we had an exhibition there.
Oh, it must have been in the 70s before I got here,
Even
because I would have
before
gone
that,
to see
maybe in the
it.
60s.
Before there really was a historical society then.
Yeah. Because I moved to Rhode Island in 76. So it would have to be before that, maybe 5 or 6 years before that.
Well, the society was incorporated in April 1971.
Yeah.
But I gathered that there'd been informal meetings prior to
Oh,
that.
yes. Quite a few. And you must have here some record of the date when the society was actually formed.
Yes, but we were going from the charter date, which was April 71. What part did Mayor Wagner play?
Well, he was always very supportive. He didn't play a very active role, but he was very supportive of the whole thing. And he had a great interest in protecting the past, the village's past, and he was almost solely responsible for saving Zinzer Park.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Zinzers, and maybe this shouldn't be on tape, had planned to sell the property for condos, but Mayor Wagner moved in with the threat of eminent domain, and the village
I
took
believe
over.
we have some some of this.
Yeah.
Too bad that that beautiful big house was torn down.
Yeah.
Was it in bad shape?
No, it wasn't in that bad shape.
I
Too
always-
bad it should have been preserved.
I've often wondered why on earth it was torn down, because from the photographs we have, it looked like a lovely mansion.
Yeah. I don't remember whether it was torn down by the family or by the village. If it was the village, they probably did not want to take on the responsibility of maintaining it
Yeah,
because it was a big place.
yes. They could have converted it into apartments or something,
Well,
income producing. Well, maybe there are laws against that.
no, I don't think so, but it really would not have been, would have been quite a job to adapt it to that.
So he was responsible for saving that as a park, as open space.
Yes. He was a good mayor. He really had a great, I won't say love, but a great feeling for the village, and he did all he could to protect our interest.
Well, Florence Katzenstein told me that that she was worried that when they put in the North Yonkers Community Church, that the Dykeman farmhouse was not, and they were afraid they would bulldoze that down to make a parking lot. And she said that he had told his police department to keep checking, and if a bulldozer approached, to let him know immediately.
Yeah. Oh, he was very civic-minded in that area.
How did he feel about the Draper cottages on Washington Avenue?
Well, he felt that they should be preserved too. But of course, that was premature at that time because the Draper family still had a strong interest in that property.
Can you remember some of the other early programs?
No. When you get to my age, it's not too easy to try to recall these things. If I say, I will try to go back and see what I have in my records, and I can help you better, I think. But we had talks, presentations.
Were they open to the public?
Oh, yes, always.
Do you remember, did the Drapers play a role in the early years?
Yes, they did. Jack and Mary.
What did they do you remember?
Well, other than being very supportive and being active members, I don't recall that they did anything particular.
What was your basis of money to support the activities?
Mostly just memberships.
And Gordon Smith, I guess, was in charge of the early newsletters.
Yeah, I think so.
Was he a writer by profession?
Well, no, yes and no. He had worked for, I think the Times, the New York Times at one point, or it might have been the Herald Statesman. And in his latter years, he worked for the New York Telephone Company.
As
He
public
was
relations?
Public relations advertising man.
So he did the same sort of thing you did?
Yeah.
He was a great tennis player.
Yes.
We want to do an article on tennis in Hastings, probably in the summer issue. Do you have any, were you involved in
Well, I
any of the
wasn't,
tennis matches?
no, I wasn't a tennis player, but of course, one of the major tennis courts in the village was the Tower Ridge Yacht Club courts at, on what was the Ross property, over near the edge of the bank overlooking the river, where those apartments are, the
River Glen?
River Glen, yeah.
Were they up at the top?
Yes.
Because Helen Cornell, who lives in one of those apartments, told me that River Glen used to have tennis courts, but as she described it to me, they were down below near the tracks.
I don't remember any tennis courts down near the tracks.
You don't?
No. I remember the yacht club courts up on the top of the hill, and when River Glen was built, they were given up. They didn't have them anymore. But there was nothing down by the tracks.
I'll have to ask her about that again. That ravine has all filled in now. She said, I guess she and her husband moved there when the place opened. And she said there used to be steps going down, and I thought she said that there was a tennis court down there.
Well, I wouldn't say positively. I mean, I don't like to do that because when those years came along, I didn't get down there very much. But we used to play in that glen.
Oh, I'm sure.
It was, my recollection now, too narrow for tennis courts.
I couldn't tell because it's so
Yeah.
overgrown.
Part of it, the north side of it was owned by the Shaws, and the south side by Commodore Ross. The Shaw, we used to play baseball down there. There was enough room to play have a small baseball diamond near the railroad tracks. And the Shaws had a gardener, man from Dobbs Ferry, who used to come down there and shoo us away. So when we play baseball, we wouldn't, we played as if we were dumb, you know, no noise, no shouting or anything else. And we didn't want to attract
Very much
attention.
fun.
Well, it was different. I remember one time a couple of railroad men came walking along the tracks, and they watched us for a little while, and they seemed to be astounded because we weren't saying anything. It was so quiet. Probably thought we were deaf and dumb.
Well, how did Gordon gather the material for the newsletter?
Well, I can't really give you any detail on that. I guess it's just the same way that you gather any information for a thing like that.
I wondered if he did original research, for instance.
I don't think so. Gordon's material is mostly current. I don't think he did too much delving into past history.
Were you involved in organizing the material?
No, I don't think so.
Who did that?
Well, there were some women in the society at the time, and with Gordon, I guess possibly they worked on that. I remember at one point we were putting out stuff called Then and Now, pictures of the various areas of the village as they were years before and as they were at that time, the new time. That always interested people. That was
We're doing that kind of a project now.
Well, the organization started with growing pains like any others of this type, but eventually it took hold and membership grew very rapidly and it reached the pinnacle it has achieved now.
Did you establish firm policies, or did they just kind of grow? I'm thinking, for instance, about, acquisitions.
No, we really didn't have policies that they just grew, you know. Thing like that, you kind of feel your way.
Yeah, so when a problem arose, you decided then how to solve it.
Right. One of the things that pleased us all was the fact that in years past, people said, oh, Hastings, they don't have any history. That's just a factory town without anything, any background at all. But it was really amazing to us when we started digging all the things that we found.
Well, I think could probably be said of most of the villages along the Hudson that had an industrial waterfront.
Yeah.
For instance, Ossining still has one to some extent, and yet there's an awful lot of history in Ossining
Yeah.
and Croton.
Well, Hastings was not very important back in the mid-19th century. It was just a little blob on the landscape. In fact, in the early days, I don't think the railroad even had a station here.
Oh, really?
When they first established the
When it
railroad in the
came through?
1850s,
Yeah.
I have a map that shows that, and the first one is up near Tarrytown, above Yonkers.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Well, of course, people commuted by steamboat for quite a while, I guess.
Yeah. Well, not too many people commuted in those days.
That's true.
New Yorkers people who worked in New York lived there because it was a livable place, but it wasn't until the late 19th century that people began to commute from these areas.
So you were all surprised, too, to find out how much history Hastings did have?
Yes.
Do you remember where the map case came from?
No.
Somebody must have given it to the...
Probably. I don't remember.
Somebody was asking me the other day, and I had no idea where it had come from. It had always been part of the equipment.
Yeah.
But whoever gave
Virginia
it to it...
McGuire might know.
I'll try to remember to ask her.
Yeah. I'm sure she would.
Now, when did she become involved?
Well, I can't tell you exactly, but probably in the late 60s or 70s, early 70s.
Did you have any fundraising activities?
No, not really.
Didn't go in for that.
No.
I guess that booklet that the Chamber of Commerce put out in the late 60s was before the society was organized. You know the one I'm talking
Yeah.
about, the one that had so many errors in it?
Yeah,
I wondered if that had been at all a catalyst for...
I don't think so.
Don't think so, all right.
No, I don't.
Well, now, you were the third president?
Third, yeah.
Which,
Jerry Finkelstein was first, and Gordon was second. I was third.
then Florence
Right.
came after you.
Yeah.
Who are, are there any other people that you haven't mentioned yet that you can think of who were involved in those early years?
Well, I would have to go back to my records, such as they are. Jenny Pingree was always interested.
Oh, yeah, she was the social studies teacher.
Well, history teacher.
History teacher.
Yeah. Yeah, she was always very supportive.
Quite active, too. We've got some of her, I've looked through some of her notes. Was she well liked by the students?
Yes, oh yes. She was my teacher when I
Oh,
was in
she?
school, yeah.
Oh,
History. We always used to laugh and remember the first thing she would say when the class convened was, students, your assignment for tomorrow will be, and then she would give us an assignment, like checking up on the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which was being made law at that time, or had been made law. Yeah, she was a very nice person. We had some wonderful teachers in those days at the school.
Who were some of the others?
Well, Miss Herrick, who taught Latin. Let's see, the French teacher, Miss Filkins.
How about Sarah was an English teacher?
Oh, Jones, Sarah
Jones.
Jones, yeah.
We get notes from her every once in a while.
Yeah, I was in one of her classes.
Did the society in those times make any effort to become involved with the school?
Well, through Miss Pingree, yeah.
Through Miss Pingree.
Yeah, and we did have a good relationship with the school. She would have classes on local history at that time. Another teacher I didn't mention was Mrs. Owens, who taught chemistry. Her maiden name was Bertha Newt, K-N-U-T-E.
K-N-U-T-E.
After she retired, she moved up to Garrison. She married Lakin Owens, who was a local, I guess he was a newsman and publisher. He had a printing press operation up on the north end of Warburton Avenue, where Schnibbe's place is now, Bob Schnibbe's.
Oh. So that was a printing place.
Yeah, he printed one or two of the last of Henry Collins Brown's books.
Oh. Did you know him at all?
Yep.
What was he like?
Well, he was much older than I, and he was just a local entrepreneur. I didn't really know him too much personally. He was a member of the yacht club. I remember that. I don't recall too much of the details of that work. Brown, of course, kind of fell apart for the most part of his career.
That's what I gathered from the little bit of research I've done on him. Well, is there anything else you'd like to record for posterity?
Well, I can't think of anything on this subject right at the moment, but if you'll give me a little while to go through the
Okay.
See if I can find my Hastings Historical Society file. I don't know where I put it. I've been looking for it.
Yeah, did you look under H?
I don't file that way. But I know it's there. Then I will get back to you.
Okay, well, that would be fine. We want to do, I guess probably I'll end up doing an article sometime during the year about, since it's the 20th anniversary. And that's why I wanted to talk to some of you early
Yeah.
activists. I wrote to Gordon. I didn't really expect an answer.
No, I'm afraid you wouldn't get it because Gordon is not able to write.
I thought maybe he could dictate something. Is it his daughter or his son that he lives with?
Well, he lives with his daughter, but his son is up there too.
Yeah, well, I thought I had met the son.
Greg.
Greg, yes.
His daughter is very nice.
They brought him down to the opening of the cottage. And that's where I remember talking to the son at one point.
His daughter's name is Valerie.
Well, I didn't really expect to hear from him, but I wrote anyway, thinking possibly he would dictate something.
Well, let me dig a little deeper, Marion.
This is an interview with Bill Ewen for the Hastings Historical Society. My name is Evelyn Drews. The date is April 5th, 1991. Bill, I'd like in the Hastings Historian Spring issue, you showed a picture of your family home at 618 Broadway, and I'd like us to go back to that time and talk about life at 618 Broadway. What was your father's name?
William Carnegie Ewen.
And your mother's name?
Marjorie Livingston Wilde, W-I-L-D-E.
And what year were they married? Do you remember?
Not offhand.
Not offhand. But
I
you,
can get the date for
but you were the oldest child.
Yes.
And there were 4 children in your family.
Yes.
And who were they?
Well, it was Theodore, who was next in line, Robert, and Marjorie, in order of age.
Do you know when your parents came to live at 618?
Yes, we moved there about 1917.
And you were a young child?
Yeah, about 4 years old.
Yeah. And tell me, describe that house at 618. It looks like an enormous house.
It is a big place, and it looks even bigger because on the north side there's a bank that slopes down toward Edgar's Lane, and when you're standing on Broadway you tend to look up to the top of the house. But it had a fairly large attic or third story, and my father in later years used a room up there as an office, and part of it was used for servant quarters.
Tell me how you ran that big house. Your mother had live-in help for the house?
Yes.
What kind of help did she have?
Well, we had a cook and a maid.
A live-in?
Live-in, yeah.
And you had other help that came in by the day?
Well, a laundress, yes, once a week.
And what happened with the yard work?
Well, I'm trying to think. We did have somebody do quite a bit of that in the early years. After my brothers and I grew up, we kind of took it over. We not only did the yard work, but we took care of things such as the furnace and what we called the barn, which was used as a garage. That was a building that today is an apartment.
Yes, I noticed that. Did you use it for anything besides a garage?
Well, the upstairs was just a big open area.
Oh.
I had a dark room up there for a while doing photographic work.
Yeah. Tell me, what did your father do, Bill?
He was a broker in Wall Street.
And he had a few other things that he did.
Yeah, he was on several boards, the board of the Third Avenue Railway System, which included the trolley lines in Manhattan, the Bronx, part of Queens, and of course part of Westchester too.
Did your mother belong to any social organizations, or?
Yes, she did. Not too much locally, but she was a member of the Huntington Family Association, being a descendant of Huntingtons.
Was church a big item in those days?
Yes, it was. We all went to church every Sunday.
And locally, or?
The South Presbyterian Church.
In Dobbs. Yeah, right. Tell me about when it was time for you to go to school, Bill.
You mean
the first little
high
school?
The first
the first little school that you went to.
Well, I think the first one was the school operated in the old real estate office up in Riverview Manor by Miss Handy, who later became Mrs. Eagles.
Yes.
And then I went for a short time to Miss Truby's school.
And where was that located?
Well, at that time it was up in Dobbs Ferry, between Broadway and the Aqueduct. The house is still there.
Was that the Lewis Hine house?
No. No, the Hine house is on Edwards Lane.
Right. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And this was in Dobbs Ferry. It was on Broadway. That was the address, but I didn't go there for too long. Then I went to trying to think of the name of the school in Yonkers on North Broadway. I think it's still there.
I think it's been changed into something else. It was a good private school at one time. I can't recall the name either, but I'll fill it in later because I do know the school you're talking about.
There were a group of us from Hastings who used to go down there.
Were you bused down?
Well, they hired a taxi from Dobbs Ferry, and we all piled into that twice a day. Went down and were brought back.
Do you remember any of the group that went down with you?
Yeah, I remember a couple of them. One was Helen Ranney from Dobbs Ferry. She later became Mrs. Harold Hab. She's deceased. And I don't...
Any other local...
No.
You don't remember any local
No.
boys that went down with you? Yeah. And after Yonkers, you...
Then I went to the Hudson River School, which was established in 1922. And we had our first classes up at the Hine House on Edwards Lane. And I went to that school until I got to high school age. Then I started going to the Hastings High School.
Your brothers didn't follow your path. They went to Scarborough. Why did they happen to go to Scarborough?
Well, I guess my parents thought that it was a good place, and they wanted me to go there too, but I said I was going to go to Hastings.
And your father happened to be on the board, on the school board.
He was on the board for a time, yes, at Scarborough.
That may have influenced him a little.
He was also one of the founders of the Hudson River School.
Do you know why they established the Hudson River School?
Yes, at the time there was some local dissatisfaction with the Hastings schools. Mr. Murphy, who had been principal, had a falling out with the trustees, or vice versa, and a lot of people were angered. I don't remember why. I don't remember any details of this, but quite a few people took their kids out of the public school, and Mr. Murphy later became principal of the Hudson River School.
But you graduated from Hastings High
Hastings
School.
High, yeah.
And who was the superintendent then?
John Hopkins.
I remember him well, yes. And
So
you went
do
on, and you went on from Hastings High School to,
To NYU,
and
the University Heights College, and I graduated from there in 1935.
And you had a job for a long time with Borden.
Yeah, at the end of 35, I joined Borden, and I was with the company for about 37 years. In the latter years, I was corporate advertising director and director of government relations. Took me to Washington quite a bit.
And I read in our archives that you also was associated with the UN in some way. Tell me about that job.
The UN? No.
No, I misread then.
Maybe you're thinking of the National Advertising Review Board.
Maybe that's, possibly. I'm mistaken about that then.
That was established by the industry in 1970. The purpose was to monitor advertising, handle complaints about possible false and misleading advertising. And I became the first executive director, later deputy chairman of that. It was an interesting experience.
Did you like that job better
Yes,
than?
Well, I can't say I liked it
Better.
better, but it was...
Yeah, a different
Yeah.
sort of, yeah.
And I stayed in that until I felt it was getting to be time to retire, so I retired about, I think, in 75.
And what year were you president of the Historical Society? Do you
Well,
recall?
I don't recall, but I think it was in the 50s, I believe.
I've got it
Late
written.
50s.
Yeah. Okay. And you were the third president
Yes.
of the Historical Society. And when you were president, Gordon Smith was vice president.
No, well, Gordon had been president before me.
He was the second president. But
I think, yes. I
he was
guess
the your vice president.
Yeah, I think so.
And Grace LaFay was the secretary.
Right.
Yeah. And you only had 5 or 6 board members back in those
Right.
days. But I also read that when you were president, that you gave a $50 award to a high school student, Bonnie Gonder, for some essay that she had written, a historical type of essay.
Yeah, we had a thought at one time that it would be good to work with the school and try to get the kids interested in Hastings history. And, but that really didn't take off the way we had hoped.
You're right.
We were very fortunate to have Jenny Pingree as one of our active members and trustees,
right.
and she always had the society in mind when it came to her history classes.
Yeah, right. Well, let's go back when you boys were just kids. Tell me what you did for fun. What was fun to do in Hastings in those days?
Well, we had to pretty much create our own fun because they didn't have all the athletic
Not a
activities.
youth center or
Nothing like
nothing
that.
planned?
No.
No planned activities for you?
We like to explore the village, walking around town, along the aqueduct, going over toward the Sawmill Valley. And, that was one activity, and we did have our own ball field and played baseball.
Where was your ball?
Well, at the time I was at the Hudson River School, this was not a field that we owned or had any title to, but it was just over the line in Dobbs Ferry. It was a large vacant lot area.
Did all of your brothers play together and a
No.
few neighbors, or?
No, we didn't, because we were different ages and
Different interests?
we had our own
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah,
Not that I shunned them or anything
No.
like that, but some of us belonged to a little club that Dan Ryle was very instrumental in setting up, called the Tower Ridge Club. It was in Ryle's backyard. We built a clubhouse there. We used to have what we always referred to as evening services. We get together and play cards. The only game we ever played was a game called Michigan, a very simple card game. And there was a flagpole attached to the building, and we'd fly the flag during the daytime, but at night when members were in there, we'd post up a red lantern so I could look out of the window at the house and see whether the lantern was up and know whether to go down or not.
Oh, you said that you were friends with Dan since early childhood, since you were 5 or 6
He was one of the first boys I met when we moved to Hastings. We became good friends because he was closer to the river than I was, and he used to drag me down to watch the steamers go by.
And that was a hard job to drag you down to watch the steamers.
Well, of course, at that time I didn't know much about them. I hadn't had a chance to develop an interest.
And did Dan share that interest in the
yes,
steamers?
very much.
Yeah. So you...
We used to spend hours drawing pictures of the boats, pencil drawings. And it was fun. And later on, we became active down at the Tower Ridge Yacht Club. We used to spend a lot of time boating on the river, either rowing. I had several boats over the years. And
how old were you when you had your first boat down there?
well, I guess I was about 16, 17. It was a small 16-foot inboard motorboat. My father bought me to shut me up, I guess. It was a nice little boat, and we used to go across the river over to Piermont and sail down the river to Yonkers. I once made a trip with Fred Hayes, who was Commodore Ross's nephew, up to Burlington, Vermont in a boat. We went up through the Champlain Canal.
How old were you when you did that?
Well, we were both in high school.
Yeah. And your parents weren't concerned about...
Well, they may have been, but they couldn't do much about it. We were determined to go. Well, I guess they had confidence.
How long did that trip take you?
About 2 weeks. Of course, we didn't try to rush it. The boat only would make about...
Would you camp along the river bank? Or?
Yeah, we'd camp, or we would sleep in the boat with cushions.
Who was the cook?
I was most of the time.
Did you take a lot of supplies with you?
No, we would buy as we went along. We'd come to a town like Whitehall, New York, at the end of the canal, go uptown and find a store. And
Who went along besides you and Dan?
Oh, this was Fred Hayes.
Oh, Fred Hayes. I'm sorry. That's right. I'm still at Dan on my mind.
Nobody else.
Just the two of
Wasn't room
them.
of us in the boat for any more people.
Yeah. Right. What else did... boating seems to be your obsession at that point.
Yeah.
But you did have the dark room. Did you do much photography?
A great deal of photography. I kind of taught myself, particularly in developing and making copy pictures. That was something that I always wanted to do because I ran across so many interesting steamboat pictures that needed copy. So I made my own copy equipment.
Yeah. Well, your father was interested in trains. Did he encourage the love for trains, or?
Well, we used to look at train magazines and books together. His interest, I think, was more centered on trolleys and trains, because he was, I mentioned the Third Avenue Railway. He was also a director of the United Traction Company in Albany, which ran trolleys between Albany and Schenectady and Troy.
Tell me about your other brothers. Did they have the same interest in boats?
Ted did, but Bob never did.
What, you told me that Ted had an interesting job.
Yeah, well, Ted was, he became an artist. He graduated from Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, and he used to paint covers for Yachting Magazine for a long time. And, during the war, before he went into the service, he worked for Gibbs and Cox, the naval architects. And they, of course, were the designers of the United States, the liner of the United States. He liked that all very much. But Ted liked to build boats, small boats himself, too. He built quite a
Sailing?
few rowboats. And he got hold of a old steel lifeboat down on the Harlem River and brought it up and made it into a sloop. Did a lot of sailing in that.
He had a very interesting job just not too long ago.
Yeah, he branched out from art to restoring old historic homes and buildings. I think he was the last supervisor of the restoration work up at Lyndhurst. And he's done quite a few over across the river. Sneaker's Landing.
And what, Bob, tell me about him.
Well, Bob was in the service. He was in the Army. And after he came out, he went to work for the Bank of New York. Became the vice president. He was in charge of the, what he called the CBS office at 52nd and 6th.
And Marjorie?
Marjorie went to work during the war years in New York. She was in the fashion business for a little while. And after the war, she married Ralph Manconi, who was a designer of medals, historic medals and medallions, and did the Eisenhower Medal. And they lived in Pleasantville, and Ralph died suddenly, unfortunately, and Marjorie moved to Cape Cod, where she is now.
Some of his father's work is still in evidence down on Riverview.
Old Mr. Manconi, and I knew him well, wonderful gentleman, Italian gentleman, very elegant. But he built cement posts at the either end of the passageway that runs from the end of Maple Avenue over to Riverview Place, and he cast bronze squirrels, which are on top of those pillars.
People still walk down to see them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, he did lots of other things, too. That wasn't all he did.
Okay. I think we'll stop there and turn on the other side. Okay. What the village was like when you were growing up.
Well, it was an interesting place. It was kind of rural at that time, and that was a little bit surprising because it's so close to New York. The village itself had a lot of stores owned by individuals. We didn't have all the chain stores that we have today. I think there was a Grand Union on Main Street, as I recall, and there were a couple of others of those small chains on Warburton Avenue. But when you bought food, you went to Schatz's Meat Market or Ferrera's Grocery, and you didn't have to go to the stores. You could just call up, or they would call you every day and say, what do you want delivered today? Schatz's had an old delivery truck, a Model T Ford. The two brothers operated the business. George was the main butcher. He stayed in the shop with his straw hat and his apron. And John made the deliveries, driving the old Model T. And,
Two-man operation?
yeah.
They didn't live above the store? Or?
Oh, no.
No?
John lived on Maple Lane, the north end of Tower Ridge, and George lived on Warburton Avenue.
Did your mother have meat delivered every day, or?
Well, I'm not sure. She would get on the phone in the morning and talk to them. I remember she would become very annoyed if the lines were busy for any length of time. Ferrera's eventually put in a second phone line so that they could handle the business. And, of course, the main...
Ferrera's, though, had carried a variety of things.
Yes.
They had a meat market?
No, they didn't have any meat.
Just vegetables.
Vegetables and canned
And
goods,
canned goods.
crackers and things like that. Regular grocery store products.
Did you get your fresh vegetables from them?
Yes.
Yeah. And they delivered also?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
They didn't handle motor oil and things like that most of the supermarkets have today. The main drugstore, of course, for many years was Hanford Todd's store on the corner of Main and Warburton. That was later taken over by Joe Algio, who worked for Dr. Todd, as we called him.
Well, Joe Algio, I can remember quite well. You'd go in and tell him what was bothering you, and he'd pick some kind of medication for you.
Right.
People had such confidence in him to prescribe. It was...
He was almost a benefactor to a lot of people in the village.
I think I've heard stories about people needing medicine, and he had put it on the cuff. I don't know that they ever really got around to paying him, but he trusted people. And, his son still owns that building.
He does.
Yeah. Has a lot of things in the basement that the present operators there tell us about at the Historical Society, but I don't know if we're going to get them or not.
Well, Joe's prices were always reasonable. And in the drugstores today, and it's really not their fault, it's the manufacturers. The prices are skyrocketing all the time. But I remember occasionally you'd get a prescription and take it down there, and Joe would look at it and he'd say, "What do you want that for?" And a lot of people, I think, had about as much faith in him as they did in their doctors.
I'm sure they did, yeah.
And
well, now that store remains, it's changed, it's not a drugstore, but that store is still there. Ferrara's is now what store, do you know?
Well,
is that where the florist is?
I think it could be.
Yeah, it's in that area, yeah.
The meat market that I mentioned, Schatz's, that building was torn down. It was a little building, just one room, and
was
you
that
had to walk up several steps to go in.
Where was that located?
On Warburton.
On Warburton. We're still on Warburton.
Yeah. There weren't many stores on Main Street.
Yeah.
Most of them were concentrated on Warburton and Spring Street.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are things about the village that you recall that made life interesting at the time. One is the factory whistles, which you probably have heard about before.
I haven't heard the factory whistles. Tell me about them.
Well, there was Anaconda, and
What time did they blow?
well, I'll get to that in a minute.
I'm sorry. I don't want to rush you.
There was Anaconda and the Hastings Pavement Company and Zinzer's. And I think they all had at least 2 whistles. And they would blow at noontime, not always together. There used to be a saying around here that it's beginning to be 12 o'clock. But it's surprising how you came to depend on those for time. And then, of course, at night, there was a 9 o'clock curfew when all the kids were supposed to be off the street. And that was blown very severely by the whistle on the Anaconda plant. And that whistle, too, was used as a fire signal to summon the volunteers. And then there was, of course, Zinzer's. I've forgotten what they blew for, but I remember the end of World War II, when the ships were coming up the river to discharge veterans over at Piermont. Those whistles would be blowing all the time as these ships went by.
Yeah.
I don't know how it was during World War I, because I don't think they had that kind of transport. But that was one thing that we all remember. And then
Did the police make sure you stuck to the curfew?
well, I don't recall, because I remember that I was out many times after the curfew. It probably was a good idea, although the kids weren't really bad in those days the way they are today. We had no drugs and things of that kind. But another thing that was interesting, of course, was how the police department ran. I remember very early I heard many stories about Captain Cronell of the Hastings police force. His son later became a detective. And there was a great story how Cap Cronell tracked down a criminal over in the woods, Mount Hope, and had a shootout with him. I don't remember what the result was, but
he survived.
He survived. Remember, the man was caught and arrested. But there was very little mobility for the department. Policemen would be on foot all the time. You know, they had no police cars in those days. And they'd hang around down the village. You had to go down to get them if you needed them. I remember a truck came down Broadway from the north one day and started up the hill there at the Warburton intersection, and it ran into a pole. A friend of mine and I went running over. The 2 men in the front got out, and we thought they were drunk. I think they were, actually. Well, we decided we'd have to get a policeman, have them arrested, so we ran down into the village, and we found Officer Al Smith, who was becoming somewhat elderly in those days, and he was rather heavy and short of breath. So we had to walk back. We were very impatient, and Al was following us, puffing away. But we got him back up there in time, and he arrested both of these men. I think he took them down to what's called the lockup.
Where was the lockup then?
It was in the old municipal building, the jail.
Yeah.
And then something else I wanted to recall on that. Oh, the old signals. We had no traffic lights, of course. And in New York City, the city put up several very ornamental brass towers on Fifth Avenue, one at 42nd Street and couple of others at the main intersections. And they would have a policeman up in the tower who would manually switch lights from red to green. So Hastings thought that was a good idea, and they built a wooden shack in the middle of the street, middle of Warburton Avenue at Main Street. I think it was built before the trolleys were taken off, so that when the streetcars came up, they'd have to swing around into Main Street and just miss that tower. But they'd always have a policeman sitting in there, and he would push the buttons or turn the handles and change those lights. And they also...
Did he favor any special people if he had friends, he'd let them go through faster?
Well, I don't know. I can't answer that. But it was, of course, a blockade in the middle of the street. It didn't help traffic, such as the traffic was in those days.
It might slow it down a little.
It slowed it down, yeah. And then they also had Sunday traffic control at the intersection of Warburton and Broadway, the north end of Warburton. And that consisted of a pole on a stand with signs up at the top saying stop and go, and that was manually manipulated. On a hot day, they'd have an umbrella over it, and policemen would stand there during the worst of the Sunday traffic and handle that thing. And I remember one Sunday a family came up from Warburton Avenue for a Sunday drive, as they said, a spin in those days. And this was a Dodge Brothers touring car, hard to steer. Well, to get back to what we were talking about before the phone call, I was speaking about this incident on a Sunday at the corner of Broadway and Warburton when Officer O'Leary was on duty. I think he was a sergeant at the time, had a gold badge anyway. This car, this Dodge Brothers touring car, which is notoriously hard to steer, came up Warburton Avenue and knocked him down and ran over his legs. He was just bruised because the cars were pretty light in those days, but it created a big sensation there. Everything stopped. Police officer run over, and the poor man who was driving the car was really upset. He thought they were going to put him in jail for the rest of his life. But I got that straightened out. But that was all. No, it was a bad corner. We had many, many accidents in and around 618. I remember we would sit down for dinner Sunday evening, and at the middle of the dinner, crash, and we'd all get up and run out. The car would have hit a pole, or there'd be a two-car accident, because that was the days before we had the parkways and the throughways and all, and Broadway was the main traffic artery between New York and the north. It isn't quite that bad today, but it really was in those days. I'm just trying to think of some other interesting things.
What were some of the other stores in the village? Beauty shops for the ladies, or?
No, I don't think there were any beauty shops in those days.
No dress shops for the ladies?
Well, they had what they called dry goods stores.
Uh-huh.
There was one run by Charles Rose.
Uh-huh.
And he had the store there for many, many years.
Where was his?
On Warburton Avenue, south of Spring Street. There were quite a few small stores in that area there.
Was Hastings House there at that time?
Hastings House.
The restaurant?
Oh.
The corner of Spring and Warburton.
I don't think so. Maybe it was. Of course, on one corner you have the Farragut Inn.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what I meant,
Yeah.
Farragut,
Right.
Farragut Inn, rather
There
than
was no
Hastings House.
no restaurant right in there on the corner. They did serve food, and during Prohibition, other things. But, yeah, that was a popular place for a lot of the villagers.
Did young people go in there?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Then on Spring Street, you had Stroman's Barber Shop down at the corner of what was called Dock Street. A better name, I think, than Southside Avenue. I just think that's totally
It's
inappropriate.
nothing, yeah.
But I used to get my hair cut at Stroman's. I remember old Mr. Stroman, Herman. And it was always very peaceful in there and relaxing. No sounds except the scissors clipping and the Tompkins and Beavers coal trucks would come up from the yard down on Railroad Avenue, and they were very slow. They put them in low gear, and they would grind their way up around that corner. That was one of the sounds that I remember. That company, of course, was a mainstay in Hastings for years, providing fuel.
Most of the houses were heated by coal
Yes.
in those days.
I remember when it was taken over later by other owners, Jim Letty, who was a very active Rotarian and other things. In the office, they would always have newspaper clippings about oil burner explosions in houses.
Discouraging conversions, right? Yeah.
But then there was a tailor shop. Oh dear, I'll remember the name of it.
Okay.
It was later Denny Paradise's shop. But Mr. Rohrbach was the former owner of that. Very dignified gentleman. Always take our suits down there to be pressed.
Where did you buy your suits, Bill?
Well, that's an interesting thing. This was a family tradition, I guess. The boys always had their suits bought at Rogers Pete in New York. And I grew up wearing Rogers Pete suits. But they
But
were
you
a very
took them
good
down
company.
there to be tailored?
Well, they were tailored at Rogers Pete
Yeah,
when
right.
we bought them, but we took them to Rohrbach's to be
For the
pressed and
Cleaning and
cleaned.
pressed, you're right.
Of course, in those days, everything like that had to be dry cleaned. You couldn't wash the suits. They didn't have any of the synthetic
Yeah.
fabrics.
Where did your mother buy her clothes?
Well, I think mostly at Altman's in New York. That was one of her favorite stores.
Right, and your sister also?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we ought to shut the
Was the,
machine off until I get them.
did you go to Bruning's for ice cream
Oh,
sodas?
yes. Never went anyplace else.
Did they have homemade ice cream?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
We thought it was very good, but I guess by today's standards, maybe it wasn't quite that good. I think Mr. Bruning probably put a lot of gelatin or something in the ice cream so that we could always say when it unfroze, it didn't lose its shape. But he was very nice and always nice to the kids.
Did the Brunings live above their store?
I think they did for a while, yes, but then they lived down in Tower Ridge.
Uh-huh.
They had a house at the end of Edmark Place.
Were there diners in town?
Yes, there was one on Warburton Avenue, about where the passageway is from Warburton back to the parking lot. And then later, there was another one on Spring Street.
Did you eat there very much or not?
Not a great deal, no.
Where'd you go when you went out as a family to have for dinner?
Well, we didn't go out very much.
You had the
The family
cook
had a
and-
place in Carmel, and during the summer, we'd be up there most of the time.
You were on a lake at Lake Carmel?
No, pardon me, the house was on what is called the West Branch Reservoir, on the road to Cold Spring, Kent Cliffs and Cold Spring.
What did you do for fun up there?
Well, we did a lot of rowing on the lake. Of course, that was a city reservoir.
Yeah.
You couldn't go swimming, at least not
But you
in the
could-
daytime.
Boating, you could.
Yeah, had to have a license for a rowboat. But we had two very good rowboats, and one was a St. Lawrence skiff, round bottom, lap straight, very easy boat to row.
There was a hardware store.
Yes, trying to think now who had the main hardware store. There was one over on Warburton across the bridge. And we used to buy things over there because they were a little cheaper. Oh, Euphers, of course, was the main store
Of course.
on Main Street. And that was a wonderful store. Mr. Eufer had everything so well organized. All the items were in various bins, or you could go around the store.
And it was such a big store.
Yeah.
They were out in the middle of the store, and you could wander around and see what you wanted.
Yeah.
Did you ever get down to the basement
Oh,
next door?
yes.
That was
Had
an
to go down there if
experience,
you wanted
wasn't it?
stovepipe or anything
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Any bulky items. Speaking of stovepipe, I was thinking of the store owned by Jake Reheis on Spring Street, in a very old building there. He did heating installations, mostly hot air, I think. And that is not intended to be a slur, but I remember that the window, the front part of the store was always filled with pieces of galvanized stovepipe. And then, of course, we had a restaurant on Warburton Avenue, too, up north, opposite what was Joe Devine's garage.
Near the Catholic Church?
Yes. John, he's still around. I'm trying to think of
Bokar.
his- John Bokar, yeah. And that was about the best inexpensive meal you could get anywhere around. And John always served what he called a businessman's blue plate special. Try saying that after a drink or two.
Well, he had a business there for a long time.
Oh, he did, yes.
Still lives in the little house in back of the store.
Yeah,
The gift shop there now.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
And then, I think I may have mentioned it in my article, Joe Devine built that big garage, which was architecturally a very nice building for those times. And I think I also mentioned that on a summer day you could walk down the street, the windows upstairs would be open, and if Mrs. Devine were down there, she'd be playing the piano up there. Music would be wafted down onto the street.
Yeah. Their daughter came down to the Historical Society last Sunday
Right.
with Phyllis Harnack.
I remember her. And then, of course, there was the Hastings Theater. We never could figure out whether that was named for the village or for Foster L. Hastings, who built it. He lived down on Tower Ridge also.
Yeah, yeah. What do you know about Foster Hastings?
Well, I didn't know too much about him. He later got into a big controversy with the Tower Ridge Yacht Club because there was a bulkhead built south of the yacht club, and actually came up eventually and included the yacht club. And he started filling that in, and the yacht club didn't like that at all. But he got title to the land, and later he built a woodworking mill down there, which was quite active, and he used to have a man out in the open area making concrete building blocks. He had a hand machine, and he kind of a tent there, and he would work there day after day turning out these blocks. They'd be set up to dry after they were formed. But
How was it settled?
well, the yacht club eventually got title to their part of the land. I must look into that again. I think I have more information.
Yeah. How much was the fare to get into the movie?
Gee, I don't remember, but it was very small.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure it wasn't over a quarter.
Uh-huh. And they gave away things at the movie?
Well, that was during the Depression years, before 1929. They didn't have giveaways, but
Uh-huh.
some wonderful old pictures there. All silent, of course, in those days.
Did they have a piano player?
Yes. You got to forgive me. My memory doesn't work as well
You
as...
can't remember 25 or 30 years ago?
Ed Hewitt.
Played the
That's
piano.
more than this, 50 years ago.
Oh, okay. Right, okay.
So Ed Hewitt played the piano and also the organ. They had a small organ.
Uh-huh.
And the place was managed at the time, I recall, by a man named Hurley, who lived in the flat at the corner of Warburton and North Street. That's gone now, but there's an old flat there. And Mr. Hurley was very stout. And we'd sit on the side down near the front, and as soon as the picture started, he would walk down the aisles to make sure everybody was in place, and as he went by, he would block out the screen. Have to wait till he got by. But Ed Hewitt played the piano on, they usually had a comedy first, a short comedy, Charlie Chase or somebody like that, and then the main picture would come on. Well, for the comedy, he'd play the piano. But when the main picture came on, serious action, why the organ was the thing.
Was there popcorn?
I don't think so. I really don't.
Yeah.
At that time.
Yeah.
That came later.
Yeah, right.
But we always used to go down there for the show at the end of the week.
But the village provided most of the things you needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Of course, we spent a lot of our time down at the river, and that was always
Did you
fun.
ever swim in the river, Bill?
No more than I could help it.
Yeah.
The river was so dirty in those days, sewage and garbage and everything floating. It was just, didn't feel like going in. Once in a while, a couple of us would row out to the middle of the river and dive off a rowboat, swim out there where it was cleaner.
A lot of the village boys swam in the river.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. There are a lot of stories about swimming across the river, too.
Yeah.
They had some good swimmers. Yeah.
Of course, a lot of the village centered around the river in those days.
And you weren't a fisherman.
No,
You
I
were just into the boating.
before 1924, I guess up to 25, we had steamboats landing at the village dock. The old Raleigh, which was primarily a freight boat, the North River Steamboat Company. Later on, Anaconda had a couple of boats, steam lighters.
Yeah.